My name is Lily, and I'm from Birmingham. I'm telling this story for the first time because some memories are like splinters in the brain. The more time passes, the deeper they sink. A few years ago, my family decided to take a road trip from the Midlands up toward the Highlands. It was my mum, my dad, Arthur, my little brother Leo, and me. Dad wanted to leave at midnight to beat the motorway traffic and reach the scenic mountain passes by dawn. We always loved night drives, the empty motorways, the cool air, and the low hum of the radio, but that night, the road decided it didn't want us to leave. We were driving through the Peak District, cutting through those narrow, winding roads where the limestone walls feel like they're closing in on the car. The fog was so thick, it looked like wet wool draped over the bonnet. Everything seemed fine until the car horn started blaring on its own. It wasn't a short honk. It was a long, aggressive scream that filled the cabin. Dad slammed his hand on the steering wheel, trying to cut the connection, but it wouldn't stop. Then, the headlights flickered and died, plunging us into total blackness. The horn suddenly went silent, and the engine just stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air had turned to lead. Dad tried to restart the car, but the ignition just clicked. He realized the fuel gauge was stuck. It showed half a tank, but we were bone dry. We were stranded in one of the most desolate parts of the moorlands. Dad grabbed a torch and a jerry can, telling us to lock the doors and stay inside. He said there was a small village a few miles back and he'd be back soon. I watched his light get swallowed by the mist until there was nothing left but the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the window. Mum started praying under her breath, her voice trembling. I wrapped a blanket around Leo, who was still half asleep, but I couldn't stop my own heart from racing. That's when it started. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the back door. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at Mum, and she had gone completely still. I peered out the window into the grey fog, but there was nothing there. Then, the car rocked violently, as if something massive had just jumped onto the roof. We heard the metal groan under the weight of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps. It sounded like someone walking with wet, bare feet. Suddenly, a long, smeared handprint appeared on the front windshield. It wasn't on the outside. It appeared in the condensation on the inside of the glass, as if someone was sitting on the dashboard right in front of us. I let out a choked scream, and Leo woke up, crying that the grey man was looking through the roof. I looked toward the trees and saw two faint, reddish, glows-not-like eyes, but like burning embers hovering about 7 feet off the ground. They didn't blink. They just watched us. The car radio suddenly hissed to life, but it wasn't a station. It was a voice, distorted and deep, speaking in a language that sounded like stones grinding together. Then, the voice changed. It became high-pitched and mocking. It started repeating our names: Lily, Leo, Eleanor. The car began to shake again, and a loud bang hit the bonnet, like a heavy rock had been dropped from the sky. The atmosphere outside was transforming. The fog wasn't just white anymore. It was turning a sickly yellow, swirling in patterns that looked like reaching hands. Every few minutes, we would hear a sound like a heavy chain being dragged across the asphalt. Clink, slide, clink. It was circling the car, moving closer with every rotation. Mum gripped her prayer beads so hard her knuckles turned white. She told me to keep my eyes closed, but I couldn't. I felt a sudden, freezing draft, even though all the windows were rolled up tight. It felt as if the car was no longer made of steel, but of paper, and whatever was outside could rip through it at any second. In the distance, a torchlight flickered. I thought it was Dad and started to reach for the lock, But Mum grabbed my arm so hard it bruised. She pointed at the light. It wasn't moving like a person walking. It was gliding in a perfectly straight line, inches above the grass, moving in a zigzag pattern that no human could replicate. Then a figure emerged from the fog and stood by the driver's side window. It looked like Dad. It wore his jacket and had his face, but the skin looked like grey wax melting off the bone. The thing tapped on the glass and said in Dad's exact voice, "Lily, open the door. I've dropped the fuel cap." I was about to scream "Dad," when I remembered Dad hadn't taken the fuel cap with him. It was still sitting on the roof of the car. I looked at the thing's eyes, and they were just empty, black pits. Mum started reciting prayers louder and louder. The creature outside began to shriek, sound so loud it cracked the side mirror. It started clawing at the glass with fingernails that sounded like metal files. The temperature inside dropped so low that frost began to form on the dashboard. I could hear a wet, squelching sound coming from under the seats, like something was crawling through the chassis of the car. Leo was pointing at the floorboards, whispering that he could see fingers reaching through the carpet. We pulled our feet up onto the seats, terrified that something would grab our ankles. The scratching on the roof intensified, and then we heard a low, guttural growl that vibrated through our very bones. Suddenly, the passenger side window was hit by something wet. A thick, black sludge began to ooze down the glass, and through it, I saw a face, not Dad's this time, but a face with no features, just smooth, pale skin and a slit where a mouth should be. It pressed its non-existent nose against the glass and made a sound like a dying animal. It was as if the moor itself was trying to get inside, trying to claim us as part of the earth. Just as the glass began to spiderweb under the pressure, the real Dad appeared from the opposite direction, shouting and running toward us with a full can of petrol. The creature by the window vanished instantly, turning into a cloud of foul-smelling smoke that smelled like burnt rubber and old meat. Dad scrambled into the car, his face white as a sheet. He didn't even ask what happened. He just poured the fuel in, jumped into the seat, and forced the engine to roar to life. As we sped away, the headlights hit the road ahead. The 3 stone cans we had seen earlier were now dozens of piles, lining the road like a graveyard. Standing in the middle of them was the woman in white, her hair flying in a wind that wasn't there. We didn't stop until we reached the bright lights of a service station on the M6. When we got home to Birmingham, Leo fell into a deep fever. He kept mumbling, "The can." We left the can, but the fever didn't just stay with Leo. For weeks after, the house felt different. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed deeper, more solid. I would find small piles of grey stones under my bed, and the smell of wet earth would fill the hallway at 3 in the morning. Dad refused to talk about it, but I saw him checking the locks on the doors 10 times every night. He started sleeping in the living room with a heavy flashlight by his side. One night, I woke up to the sound of the car horn blaring in our driveway. I ran to the window, expecting to see a thief, but the driveway was empty. Only our car sat there, its lights flashing in a frantic, irregular rhythm. When I looked closer, I saw the condensation on the windshield. Inside the glass, written in that same messy hand, was a message: "I brought IT back." I ran downstairs to the front door. Sitting on the welcome mat was the rusted, muddy jerry can Dad had dropped on the moors. It was dripping with that same black sludge. I realized then that we hadn't escaped the Peak District. We had just brought the nightmare home with us. The priest told us that some entities don't just haunt locations, they haunt bloodlines. To this day, when the fog rolls into Birmingham, I hear that same rhythmic tapping on my front door. Tap, tap, tap. And a voice that sounds like my father whispers through the letterbox, "You forgot your can, Lily. I'm coming to bring it back." And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I don't see my own eyes. For a split second, I see two burning embers, and I know that whatever was in that fog is still waiting for me to step outside. I hope this story keeps you awake tonight. If you're ever driving through the Peak District and your fuel light flickers, don't look at the stone piles. And whatever you do, never, ever get out of the car. I am Lily, and this was File 992. Goodbye, and stay safe in the dark. Before you go, I have to ask you something. If you were sitting in that car and heard your father's voice outside, knowing he didn't have the keys, would you have been brave enough to keep that door locked, or would your instinct have forced you to open it? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my position. I'll be hearting the most intense responses.